The wind carried the scent of dust and despair, as Lillian Douglas clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her bony shoulders, her once elegant fingers now calloused and trembling as she waited behind the silver-dollar saloon. At 32, she looked a decade older, grief and hunger having carved deep lines into what had once been a face that turned heads in Coloma, California. 3 months a widow, and the gold rush town that had promised so much had delivered nothing but heartbreak. Lillian pressed herself against the rough wooden wall as the back door swung open, hoping the cook might take pity on her again. Her stomach had been empty for 2 days now, and the gnawing pain was becoming unbearable. She watched as scraps from the evening meals were tossed into a barrel, bits of potato, gristle, and bread ends that looked like a feast to her starving eyes. "Please," she whispered, stepping forward, her voice cracking with disuse. "Anything you can spare." The cook, a heavy-set man with perpetually sweaty brows, glanced over his shoulder toward the kitchen before quickly sliding a half-eaten biscuit and some bacon ends wrapped in a napkin into her trembling hands. "This is the last time, Mrs. Douglas," he muttered. "Mr. Hargrove says he'll fire me if he catches me feeding strays again." Lillian nodded, clutching the meager offering to her chest. "Thank you. God bless you." The door closed, and she slumped against the wall, slowly bringing a piece of bacon to her lips. The salt and fat made her dizzy with pleasure, but she forced herself to eat slowly, knowing her shrunken stomach might rebel if she rushed. 3 months ago, she had been serving dinners at her own table, not begging for scraps. 3 months ago, her husband Thomas had still been alive, still believing his claim would make them rich. The sound of raucous laughter from inside the saloon made her flinch. Men with gold in their pockets and whiskey in their bellies, gambling and carousing while she fought to survive another day. With trembling hands, she tucked the remaining food into her pocket for later and prepared for the long walk back to the ramshackle lean-to she now called home. She had taken only a few steps when the back door opened again, spilling yellow lamplight across the dirt. A man's tall silhouette appeared, and Lillian instinctively shrank back into the shadows. "Madam, are you out here?" The voice was deep, with a slight Texas drawl. "Cook said you might need more than just scraps." Lillian remained frozen, unsure whether to flee or respond. Her experiences since Thomas's death had taught her to be wary of men offering help. Such offers usually came with expectations she wouldn't fulfill. The man stepped further into the alley, and moonlight caught his face. He was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe mid-30s, with a strong jawline softened by kind eyes. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, not one of the dandies who struck it rich and came to town to throw money around. "I don't mean to frighten you," he said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Name's Vincent Xavier. My friends call me Vince. I've got a table inside with more food than I can eat, and it seems wrong when there are folks going hungry." Lillian emerged slightly from the shadows, pride warring with hunger. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Xavier." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It's not charity, madam. Just seems wasteful for me to leave good food untouched. Besides, eating alone is poor company." She hesitated. Inside would mean facing people who might recognize her, people who had known her when she'd been Mrs. Thomas Douglas, with a home and prospects and dignity. But the thought of real food served on a plate at a table made her stomach clench with longing. "Come on in," he said softly. "You can leave any time you want. No strings attached." Perhaps it was the genuine kindness in his eyes or simply that her hunger outweighed her pride, but Lillian found herself nodding. "Just for a meal," she murmured. "Nothing more." Vincent smiled, a warm expression that reached his eyes. "Nothing more than supper, madam. You have my word." He didn't offer his arm, seeming to understand that would be too much. Instead, he opened the door and waited for her to pass through, giving her the dignity of walking in under her own power rather than being escorted like a charity case. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with cooking smells that made Lillian's head swim. The cook raised his eyebrows but said nothing as Vincent nodded to him. "We'll go through the side door," he explained quietly. "Less attention that way." Lillian nodded gratefully. The main floor of the saloon would be crowded with miners, cowboys, and townsfolk who might recognize her. The humiliation of being seen in her current state might overwhelm whatever benefit the meal provided. Vincent led her to a small table in a corner alcove, partially screened from the main room by a wooden partition. A plate of steak, potatoes, and beans sat barely touched, along with a basket of fresh bread. Lillian's mouth watered at the sight. "Please sit," Vincent said, pulling out a chair. "I'll get you a clean plate and some coffee." As he walked to the bar, Lillian took stock of her surroundings. The Silver Dollar was the finest establishment in Coloma, catering to successful miners and businessmen. She and Thomas had dined here twice during better times, celebrating small victories in their quest for prosperity. Now she sat at a corner table in clothes she hadn't been able to wash properly in weeks, her hair hastily tucked under a faded bonnet. Vincent returned with a plate, utensils, and a steaming cup of coffee. He set them down and then, to her surprise, moved some of the food from his plate to hers. "The coffee's fresh," he said, sliding back into his seat. "Sugar's there if you want it." Lillian wrapped her fingers around the warm mug, savoring the heat against her perpetually cold hands. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier." "Vince," he corrected gently. "And you are," she hesitated, but only briefly. "Lillian Douglas." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Thomas Douglas's widow." She stiffened, preparing for the judgment or pity that usually followed. "Yes," Vincent nodded. "I heard he was a good man. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Douglas." "Thank you." Lillian cut a small piece of steak, fighting the urge to devour it whole. She forced herself to take small bites, chewing thoroughly. The food was exquisite after months of near starvation. "I've just come from Sacramento," Vincent said conversationally, as if they were merely acquaintances sharing a meal. "Drove a herd up from Texas. Sold the last of them yesterday." Lillian nodded, grateful he wasn't pressing her about her circumstances or staring at her torn gloves and threadbare coat. "Will you return to Texas now?" He shook his head. "Not right away. I'm thinking of putting down roots somewhere, maybe here if the opportunities are right." "Coloma is changing," Lillian said quietly. "The easy gold is gone. People are moving on to new strikes or giving up altogether." "I'm not looking for gold," Vincent replied, breaking off a piece of bread. "Just good, honest work and maybe a place to call my own someday." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Lillian couldn't remember when she'd last enjoyed such a simple pleasure as a quiet meal. The coffee warmed her from the inside, and the rich food began to ease the persistent ache of hunger that had been her constant companion. "If you don't mind my asking," Vincent said carefully, "are you staying with family here in town?" Lillian set down her fork, the question bringing reality crashing back. "No, I have no family here. Thomas and I came from Boston 3 years ago following the gold rush like so many others." Vincent nodded, not pressing further, but Lillian felt a sudden need to explain, to have someone understand how she'd fallen so far. "We had a small claim outside town. Thomas worked it while I took in sewing. We were making enough to get by, saving a little. Then Thomas got the mountain fever." Her voice grew softer. "He was gone in a week. The claim wasn't producing much, so after the funeral expenses and the doctor's bills, there was nothing left. I couldn't maintain the claim alone. Vincent's eyes held no pity, only understanding. Life out here can turn on a dime. I've seen it happen to good people too many times. I tried to find work in town, Lillian continued, the words spilling out now. But there are too many widows, too many desperate people. The sewing doesn't bring in enough to pay rent. I've been making do, and tonight. Where will you go after our meal? Lillian's cheeks burned with shame. I have a place. Vincent didn't challenge the evasion. Instead, he pushed the bread basket toward her. Take some for later. No sense letting it go stale. She hesitated only briefly before sliding 2 rolls into her pocket. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. As they finished their meal, Lillian noticed Vincent watching her with a thoughtful expression. Mrs. Douglas, I have a proposition for you. Seeing her stiffen, he quickly added, a business proposition, nothing improper. What kind of proposition? She asked warily. I've just purchased a small ranch about 3 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, just a cabin and some land. But it's more than I can manage alone, especially the household matters. He leaned forward. I need someone to cook and keep the place in order while I work the land and build up a herd. It would be a respectable position with room and board, plus wages. Lillian stared at him, searching for the catch. Why would you offer this to me? You know nothing about me except that I'm destitute enough to beg for scraps. Vincent met her gaze steadily. I know you've fallen on hard times but maintain your dignity. I know you're educated, I can hear it in how you speak. And I know what it's like to be alone in the world with no one to depend on but yourself. It wouldn't be proper, she protested weakly. A widow living in a single man's home. The cabin has 2 rooms with a separate entrance for each, he explained. Your reputation would be preserved. And if you're concerned about appearances, we could draw up a formal contract of employment that you could show anyone who questioned the arrangement. Lillian's mind raced. The offer was tempting: shelter, food, honest work, and wages. But trusting a stranger had its risks. Why not hire one of the girls looking for domestic work in town? There are plenty who would be grateful for the position. Vincent's expression grew serious. Mrs. Douglas, I'll be plain. I need someone with sense and education who can help manage accounts and correspondence as well as household duties. Most importantly, I need someone who understands hardship and values an opportunity to rebuild. Someone who will work with me, not just for me. He paused. You can say no. Or you can come out to the ranch tomorrow, see the place, and then decide. Lillian considered his words carefully. What choice did she really have? Winter was approaching, and her makeshift shelter wouldn't protect her from the cold. Starvation or freezing seemed her most likely fate if she continued as she was. I would like to see the ranch before making a decision, she said finally. Vincent smiled, relief evident in his expression. I'll bring a wagon to the general store at 9 tomorrow morning. If you're there, I'll take you out to see the place. If not, I'll understand and wish you well. As they rose from the table, Lillian felt a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. Vincent settled the bill and walked with her to the side door, maintaining a respectful distance. Thank you for joining me for supper, Mrs. Douglas, he said formally, conscious of the few patrons who could see them. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Xavier, she replied, equally formal. Outside in the cool evening air, Vincent paused. Mrs. Douglas, may I ask where you're staying tonight? Truly? Lillian hesitated, then decided honesty was the only fair response to his generosity. I have a lean-to by the creek, just past the old mill. Vincent frowned. That's no place for anyone to spend the night, especially with the weather turning. The hotel has rooms. I can't accept that, Lillian interrupted firmly. The meal was kindness enough. I've managed thus far, and I'll manage one more night. He looked as if he wanted to argue but nodded instead. Then I'll see you tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock at the general store. Perhaps, she said, unwilling to fully commit. Vincent touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture. Good night, Mrs. Douglas. Sleep well. As Lillian walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, but he made no move to follow. The remnants of their meal nestled in her pocket would be tomorrow's breakfast. And then, perhaps, a new beginning if she found the courage to trust again. The night passed slowly in her crude shelter. Despite the autumn chill, Lillian slept better than she had in weeks, her stomach satisfied and her mind full of possibilities. She woke before dawn, using precious water from her canteen to wash her face and hands, then attempted to make herself as presentable as possible with limited resources. By 8:30, she stood outside the general store, second-guessing her decision with every passing minute. What did she really know about Vincent Xavier? Men with kind smiles could still harbor dark intentions. Yet something in his straightforward manner, and the respect he'd shown her sparked a trust she hadn't felt since Thomas died. At precisely 9 o'clock, a wagon rounded the corner. Vincent sat at the reins, looking much as he had the previous night, though now wearing a clean shirt and his hat set at a jaunty angle. He pulled the horses to a stop in front of her. "Good morning, Mrs. Douglas," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm glad you came." Lillian nodded. "I thought it prudent to consider all options." A smile tugged at his lips. "Practical thinking. Let me help you up." The drive out of town followed the winding path of the American River before turning onto a smaller trail. Vincent pointed out landmarks and boundaries as they traveled, explaining his plans for the property. "It's not much yet," he admitted. "The previous owner let things go, but the bones are good. Fertile land, good water, sturdy cabin. With work, it could be a fine place." Lillian listened, noting his enthusiasm and practical assessment. He spoke like a man with a vision, but also the experience to know what was realistic. When they crested a small rise, the ranch came into view. A weathered cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, with a small barn and corral nearby. A creek cut through the property, and open meadows stretched toward distant hills. It was humble but held undeniable potential. Vincent brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "Here we are, Xavier Ranch such as it is." He helped her down and led her toward the cabin. "I've been fixing it up since I bought it last week. It needed a thorough cleaning and some repairs, but it's sound." The cabin door opened into a main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and basic cooking equipment. A doorway on the right led to a small bedroom, and another on the left to a similar space. "That would be your room," Vincent said, gesturing to the left. "It has its own entrance from outside, so you'd have privacy. I've ordered a proper bed frame from the carpenter in town, but for now, there's a decent mattress." Lillian stepped into the room. It was small but clean, with a window overlooking the creek. After her lean-to by the water, it seemed palatial. "The arrangement would be as follows," Vincent continued, moving back to the main room. "You'd handle the cooking, cleaning, mending, and help with correspondence and accounts. I'd provide room, board, and $20 a month in wages. You'd have Sundays to yourself, and if you need to go into town for supplies or personal matters, you could use the wagon when I don't need it." The terms were more than fair generous, even. Lillian ran her hand along the rough wooden table, considering. "What about reputation?" she asked. "A widow living alone with an unmarried man will cause talk." Vincent nodded, having clearly anticipated this concern. "I've thought about that. We could tell people you're my cousin, recently widowed, come to help establish the ranch. That would explain your different last name while providing a respectable story. Lying doesn't sit well with me, Mr. Xavier. Then we tell the truth that you're my housekeeper. with a formal contract of employment that establishes clear boundaries. I respect propriety, Mrs. Douglas. Your reputation is important, and I wouldn't damage it. Lillian walked to the window, looking out at the land. The position offered everything she desperately needed: shelter, food, income, and dignity through honest work. Yet caution held her back. You know very little about me, she said quietly. I could be dishonest or incompetent. Vincent leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I'm a fair judge of character, Mrs. Douglas. Had to be in my line of work. You strike me as someone who values honesty and hard work. He paused. Besides, we all deserve second chances when life knocks us down. Something in his tone suggested he spoke from experience. Lillian turned to face him. You've been in my position before, haven't you? A shadow crossed his face. Not exactly the same. But I know what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild from nothing. He straightened. So, what do you think of the place? Could you see yourself working here? Lillian took a deep breath. Yes, I believe I could. Vincent's face broke into a genuine smile. Excellent. When would you like to start? I have few possessions to gather, Lillian admitted. I could begin tomorrow if that suits you. Today would suit me better, Vincent said frankly. We could collect your things now and you could stay tonight. I'm a terrible cook and there's plenty to be done. Lillian hesitated only briefly before nodding. Very well. Today it is. They returned to town, and Vincent waited discreetly in the wagon while Lillian gathered her meager belongings from the lean-to. Everything she owned now fit into a single carpet bag: a few clothes, Thomas's pocket watch, her wedding ring, which she'd refused to sell despite her hunger, a Bible, and a daguerreotype of her parents. As they left town, Lillian felt the weight of stares from townspeople who recognized her. No doubt by evening, gossip would be circulating about the Douglas widow leaving with the Texan who'd bought the old Peterson place. But for the first time in months, she found she didn't care what others thought. She was doing what was necessary to survive, and there was no shame in that. Back at the ranch, Vincent showed her where supplies were kept and gave her a tour of the property before heading out to repair fences. Lillian spent the afternoon cleaning, taking inventory, and preparing a simple but hearty stew with the provisions Vincent had stocked. When he returned at dusk, the cabin was warmer and more orderly than when they'd left it, with the table set and food ready. He stopped in the doorway, hat in hand, surveying the transformation. Mrs. Douglas, he said with genuine appreciation, I believe this is the finest homecoming I've ever had. Lillian felt a flush of pride at his words. It's nothing elaborate, just beans and bacon stew with cornbread. It smells wonderful. He hung his hat on a peg by the door and washed his hands in the basin she'd prepared. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a neighbor for dinner tomorrow. Isaiah Jenkins owns the next property over. He's been helping me learn the lay of the land. Of course, Lillian said, ladling stew into bowls. I'll prepare something suitable. They ate together at the table, the awkwardness of the previous night giving way to practical discussion about the ranch and what supplies were needed from town. After dinner, Vincent insisted on washing the dishes while Lillian made lists of household necessities. As the evening deepened, they retired to their respective rooms with polite goodnights. Lillian lay on her mattress, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, the creek's gentle murmur, an owl's distant call, the occasional creak of the cabin settling. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The door had a lock, the roof didn't leak, and her stomach was full. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was a reprieve from desperation. As sleep claimed her, Lillian offered a prayer of thanks for Vincent Xavier and his unexpected kindness. The next morning, Lillian rose before dawn, habitually early from months of trying to complete her washing and personal care at the creek before others were about. She kindled the fire and put coffee on to boil, then set about making a simple breakfast of flapjacks and bacon. Vincent emerged from his room just as she was setting the table, looking momentarily surprised to find breakfast waiting. "Good morning," he said, running a hand through hair still mussed from sleep. "You're up early." "I'm accustomed to rising with the sun," Lillian replied, pouring coffee into the tin cups she'd scrubbed clean the night before. "I hope you don't mind that I started breakfast." "Mind. It's a welcome change from cold jerky and hardtack." He sat at the table, watching as she brought over a plate of flapjacks. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." She took her own seat across from him. "I've made a list of supplies we'll need from town. The pantry is adequately stocked with basics, but there are gaps if you want varied meals." Vincent nodded, spreading molasses on his flapjacks. "Make whatever list you think appropriate. I'll be heading into town tomorrow or the next day." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Lillian kept the cabin, cooked meals, and began putting the household in proper order. Vincent worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, clearing land, and beginning construction on a larger barn to house the cattle he planned to purchase. The promised dinner with Isaiah Jenkins turned into a regular Sunday occurrence. Jenkins was a gruff widower in his 50s who owned the neighboring ranch. He clearly approved of Vincent's decision to hire Lillian, not least because it meant enjoying regular home-cooked meals when invited. "You've done well for yourself, Xavier," Jenkins commented one Sunday evening as Lillian cleared the dishes. "Place is looking better every week, and the cooking." He patted his stomach appreciatively. "Best I've had since my Martha passed." Vincent nodded. "Mrs. Douglas has been a godsend. I'd still be eating beans from a can without her." Lillian felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment as she returned with coffee and a berry cobbler she'd made from wild berries gathered near the creek. "This arrangement benefits us both," she said pragmatically, serving the dessert. "Mr. Xavier provides me with employment, and I provide domestic services in return." Jenkins chuckled. "You're a practical woman, Mrs. Douglas. I like that." As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch began to take shape under their combined efforts. Vincent added 3 milk cows and a small herd of cattle to the property, plus chickens that Lillian insisted would provide both eggs and meat. He built proper furniture for both their rooms, revealing a skill with woodworking that impressed Lillian. For her part, Lillian transformed the Spartan cabin into a comfortable home. Curtains appeared at the windows, made from fabric purchased with her first month's wages. She planted a small kitchen garden before the frost, started a modest library on a shelf Vincent built, and added touches that made the place feel cared for. Their working relationship remained respectful and cordial, with clear boundaries that neither crossed. Vincent never entered her room without invitation, and Lillian maintained professional distance despite their close quarters. Yet as the weeks passed, a comfortable companionship developed between them. They began to share stories over evening meals, Vincent speaking of his years as a cowhand in Texas and his dreams for the ranch, Lillian recounting her childhood in Boston and her marriage to Thomas. She found Vincent to be an attentive listener, and he seemed to value her opinions on matters ranging from household management to ranch decisions. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside, they sat by the fire after dinner. Vincent was whittling a small wooden horse, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate work. Lillian mended one of his shirts, the companionable silence broken only by the crackling fire and the soft sound of her needle through fabric. "Christmas is coming," Vincent said suddenly, looking up from his carving. Is there anything special you'd like to do to mark the day? Lillian paused in her sewing. Last Christmas, she and Thomas had still been together, though his illness had already begun to show. The thought brought a familiar ache. I haven't given it much thought, she admitted. Thomas and I usually attended church and had a special dinner, nothing elaborate. Vincent nodded. My family always made a big production. My mother insisted on it. Tree presents, special foods. A shadow crossed his face. Haven't celebrated properly in years. Would you like to? Lillian asked, seeing the wistfulness in his expression. Might be nice, he said, returning to his whittling. If you wouldn't mind the extra work. I think it would be lovely, Lillian said softly. We could cut a small tree and I could prepare a proper feast. Perhaps invite Mr. Jenkins. Vincent looked up, a genuine smile warming his features. I'd like that very much, Mrs. Douglas. The use of her formal name suddenly struck Lillian as odd, given the months they'd spent sharing meals and conversation. You know, Mr. Xavier, since we're planning to celebrate Christmas together, perhaps you could call me Lillian, at least when we're alone. Vincent's hand stilled. I'd be honored, Lillian, and I hope you'll call me Vince. Vince, she repeated, testing the familiarity of it. Their eyes met across the room and something shifted subtly between them, a small but significant lessening of the careful distance they'd maintained. The moment lingered until Lillian dropped her gaze, returning to her sewing with cheeks slightly flushed. Vincent resumed his whittling, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth for the remainder of the evening. As Christmas approached, the ranch was transformed. Vincent cut a small pine and set it up in the corner of the main room. Lillian fashioned ornaments from pine cones, dried berries, and strips of colored cloth. They strung popcorn while sharing stories of childhood Christmases. Laughing over Vincent's tale of the year he and his brothers attempted to catch Santa Claus with an elaborate rope trap. On Christmas Eve morning, Vincent announced he needed to go into town for last-minute supplies. I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours, he said, pulling on his heavy coat. Will you be all right here alone? Lillian smiled at his concern. I'll be fine. I have bread to bake and preparations to make for tomorrow's dinner. Vincent nodded, hesitating at the door. I have a surprise for you when I get back. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Lillian both curious and oddly flustered. Over the past weeks, she'd become increasingly aware of Vincent as more than simply her employer. His kindness, integrity, and quiet strength had begun to awaken feelings she'd thought buried with Thomas. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. At 32, she'd assumed that chapter of her life was closed, that she would either remain a widow or, at best, enter a marriage of convenience if circumstances required it. The possibility of genuine affection, perhaps even love, had seemed remote. Yet here she was, heart quickening at the thought of Vincent's return, wondering what surprise he might bring. Chiding herself for such schoolgirl fancies, Lillian threw herself into Christmas preparations, but the anticipation lingered. Vincent returned late in the afternoon as dusk was falling, his wagon laden with supplies and mysterious parcels wrapped in brown paper. He unloaded everything with Lillian's help, but kept one small package separate. "This is for later," he said with a smile, tucking it away in his room before she could get a proper look. They spent the evening putting final touches on the Christmas decorations and preparing for the next day's celebration. Jenkins would be joining them for dinner, along with the Wilsons, a young couple who had recently purchased land on the other side of Coloma and whom Vincent had met in town. As they worked side by side, Lillian was acutely aware of Vincent's proximity, the clean scent of him after he'd washed up, the way his shirt sleeves were rolled to reveal strong forearms, the occasional brush of his hand against hers as they moved around the cabin. She wondered if he felt the same awareness, but his manner remained friendly and respectful as always. After they'd finished, Vincent stoked the fire and brought out the small package he'd set aside earlier. "I know we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow," he said, looking suddenly nervous. "But I'd like to give you this tonight, privately." Lillian accepted the package with trembling hands. It was wrapped in plain brown paper but tied with a red ribbon that suggested special care. "I haven't wrapped your gift yet," she said, feeling oddly breathless. "That's fine, this is." "Well, you'll see." He gestured for her to open it. Inside the package was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with her initials LD inlaid in a darker wood on the lid. Lillian ran her fingers over the smooth surface, touched by the evident care that had gone into making it. "Did you make this?" she asked softly. Vincent nodded. "Open it." Inside the box, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Lillian gasped, lifting it carefully. "Vincent, it's beautiful, but I can't accept such an expensive gift. Please," he said quietly. "I wanted you to have something special for Christmas. Open the locket." With fingers that weren't entirely steady, Lillian opened the silver heart. Inside was a tiny scrap of paper with elegant script. "Second chances are God's greatest gift." Tears pricked at her eyes as she read the words. "Vincent." He moved closer, his voice low and earnest. "When I found you behind that saloon, I recognized something in you, the same determination to survive that got me through my own darkest times. I admired your dignity then, but over these months, I've come to admire so much more." He paused, searching her face. "Your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. I know this might seem sudden or improper, but I needed you to know that what started as an employment arrangement has become so much more to me." Lillian's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying, Vincent?" "I'm saying that I care for you, Lillian, deeply. More than I thought possible after." He stopped, took a breath. "More than I ever expected to care for anyone again. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just wanted you to know." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks as emotions she'd kept carefully controlled for months broke free. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "I've been fighting these feelings, telling myself it was inappropriate, that you only saw me as your housekeeper." Vincent reached out, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "Never just my housekeeper. A remarkable woman who deserves every happiness." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it made fresh tears spring to her eyes. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious, and Lillian felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. When they finally separated, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Lillian." She smiled through her tears. "Merry Christmas, Vince." Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the world outside transformed by a blanket of fresh snow. Lillian woke with a sense of joy she hadn't felt in years, the memory of Vincent's kiss bringing a flush to her cheeks even before she rose from bed. They exchanged shy smiles over breakfast, their new understanding adding a layer of sweet tension to their interactions. Vincent seemed unable to stop finding reasons to be near her, bringing in more firewood than needed, offering to help with dinner preparations, standing close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. Lillian gave him his Christmas gift, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool, and a journal bound in leather she'd purchased with carefully saved wages. His evident delight at these simple offerings made her heart swell. The day passed in a blur of cooking, preparing the table and welcoming their guests. Jenkins arrived first, bearing a bottle of good whiskey and looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. The Wilsons followed Sarah Wilson, immediately striking up a friendship with Lillian, while her husband Robert discussed cattle breeding with Vincent and Jenkins. Dinner was a triumph: roast chicken with all the trimmings, fresh bread, preserved vegetables from Lillian's efforts, and a rich cake for dessert. The cabin rang with conversation and laughter, the kind of warm gathering neither Lillian nor Vincent had experienced in too long. When their guests departed in the late afternoon, full of good food and holiday cheer, Lillian and Vincent found themselves alone again. They worked side by side to clean up, moving in the easy rhythm they'd developed over months together. "That was the finest Christmas I've had in years," Vincent said as they finished. "You've created a real home here, Lillian." She smiled, warmed by his words. "We've created it together." Vincent stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Lillian's heart skipped. "Yes. Your position here as my housekeeper, it doesn't seem right anymore, not with how I feel about you." He squeezed her hands gently. "I don't want you to work for me, Lillian. I want you as my partner in every sense." Her breath caught. "Vincent, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know it might seem fast, and if you need time to think about it, I understand completely. But I love you, Lillian. I think I started falling for you that first night at the Silver Dollar when you insisted on maintaining your dignity despite everything." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "Oh, Vincent, I love you too. I've been fighting it, telling myself it was too soon after Thomas, that you couldn't possibly." He silenced her with a gentle kiss. "Is that a yes?" Lillian nodded, smiling through her tears. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Vincent gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, his expression grew serious. "I need you to know something. I'm not trying to replace Thomas. I know you loved him, and that's as it should be." "Thomas will always be part of my past," Lillian said softly. "But you're my future, Vincent. A future I never thought I'd have again." They were married by the circuit preacher in early February, with Jenkins and the Wilsons as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the main room of the cabin they now truly shared as husband and wife. Lillian wore a new dress of deep blue wool, purchased with money Vincent insisted was hers to spend as she wished. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Vincent's cattle herd grew. Supplemented by horses, he began breeding with an eye toward quality rather than quantity. Lillian expanded her garden, added more chickens, and began selling eggs and preserves in town, proud to contribute to their growing prosperity. Their happiness was complete when, a year after their marriage, Lillian gave birth to a son they named Benjamin Thomas Xavier. The boy had his father's strong features but his mother's thoughtful eyes, and both parents doted on him shamelessly. Jenkins, who had appointed himself honorary grandfather to the child, often remarked that Ben was the luckiest boy in California to have such parents. "Not many children born with a silver spoon," he'd say, bouncing the infant on his knee. "But this one was born with something better: parents who know the value of hard work and second chances." 5 years after that fateful meeting behind the Silver Dollar Saloon, the Xavier Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the area. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a dedicated kitchen, and a large front porch where Lillian could sit in the evenings, watching Vincent teach their son to ride his pony in the yard. They'd added a daughter to their family, Emma Rose, now 2 years old and already showing signs of her mother's determination and her father's charm. Lillian's garden had expanded into a productive orchard, and her preserves won ribbons at the county fair. Vincent's breeding program had earned a reputation that brought buyers from as far as San Francisco. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, Vincent surprised Lillian with a special dinner after the children were asleep. He'd prepared it himself, a recreation of that first meal they'd shared at the Silver Dollar. "Not quite up to your standards," he admitted as they sat at the table, "but I wanted to mark the occasion properly." Lillian smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "It's perfect, just like that night." "That night changed everything for me," Vincent said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I walked into that saloon a lonely man with nothing but a piece of land and some half-formed dreams. I walked out having met the woman who would make those dreams come true. And I was a desperate widow with nothing but the clothes on my back," Lillian replied softly. "Now I have a home, a family, a future." She squeezed his hand. "All because you offered your table to a stranger. And my name," Vincent added with a smile. "Don't forget that part." "Never," Lillian promised, leaning across the table to kiss him. "I'll never forget a single moment of our story." Later that night, as they lay together in the bedroom they'd shared for 5 years, Vincent traced the line of Lillian's cheek with gentle fingers. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Saying yes to a stranger's offer, taking a chance on me in this place?" Lillian turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through their window. "Not for a single moment. Every hardship I endured led me to that alley behind the saloon. Every loss prepared me to recognize what I'd found when you offered me a seat at your table." Vincent gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I thank God every day for sending you to me." "And I thank him for sending you to me," Lillian whispered against his chest. "My cowboy who gave me his table and his name when I had nothing to offer in return." "You had everything to offer," Vincent corrected, his voice husky with emotion. "Courage, strength, dignity. I saw it all that first night, Lillian. I saw you." Outside their window, the Xavier ranch lay peaceful under moonlight, cattle in the pastures, horses in the corral, fruit trees beginning to bud in the orchard. From humble beginnings had come abundance, from desperate circumstances had come joy. As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the depths of despair behind a saloon to the heights of happiness in the home they'd built together. It was a journey neither could have made alone, a second chance neither had expected but both had embraced with open hearts. In the morning, they would wake to their children's laughter, to the work and joys of the day ahead, to the life they continued to build together with each passing season. But for now, in the quiet darkness, they held each other close, the widow who had once begged for scraps and the cowboy who had given her his table, his name, and his heart. 10 years later, the Xavier Ranch had grown into one of the most respected properties in the region. What had begun as a small homestead now encompassed over 500 acres of prime land, with a herd of quality cattle, a successful horse breeding program, and orchards that produced some of the finest fruit in California. The family had grown as well. Benjamin, now 11, was his father's shadow, absorbing everything about ranching with an eagerness that made Vincent proud. Emma, 8 years old, combined her mother's practicality with a spirited nature all her own. They had been joined by Matthew, 6, who already showed a talent for working with horses, and Rebecca, 3, who tottered after her siblings with determined independence. The simple cabin had evolved into a handsome 2-story home, with wide porches and comfortable rooms filled with the treasures of a life well lived. Lillian's touch was evident everywhere, in the practical beauty of handmade curtains and quilts, in the well-tended gardens that surrounded the house, in the warmth that greeted anyone who crossed their threshold. On a crisp autumn afternoon, much like the day they'd first met, Lillian stood on the front porch watching Vincent and Benjamin ride in from checking the north pasture. Emma sat beside her, practicing her stitches on a piece of fabric while Matthew played with wooden horses at her feet. Rebecca was napping inside, giving Lillian a rare moment of relative quiet. "They're back, Mama," Emma announced, setting aside her sewing to wave enthusiastically. Lillian smiled, watching Vincent dismount and help Benjamin down from his pony. Her husband moved with the same easy grace that had first caught her eye years ago, though there were now silver threads among the dark hair at his temples. The years of hard work had etched lines around his eyes, but they only added character to a face she loved more with each passing day. "How was the north pasture?" she called as they approached, Benjamin running ahead while Vincent followed at a more measured pace, leading both horses. "The grass is still good," Vincent replied, stopping to plant a kiss on her cheek before continuing to the barn with the horses. "Should hold the herd through another month at least." Benjamin had already disappeared into the house, likely in search of the cookies Lillian had baked that morning. Matthew abandoned his wooden horses to follow his father to the barn, eager as always to help with the real animals. Emma looked up from her sewing. "Papa said we might go into town tomorrow for supplies. Can I come help choose fabric for my new dress?" "Of course," Lillian agreed, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "Though I believe your father has other reasons for wanting to go to town tomorrow." Emma's eyes widened. "Is it a surprise?" Lillian laughed. "For you children, perhaps. For me, it's a date I could hardly forget. Tomorrow would mark 15 years since that fateful evening behind the $silver saloon." Each year, Vincent found some way to commemorate the anniversary of their meeting, sometimes with grand gestures, sometimes with simple remembrances that were all the more meaningful for their thoughtfulness. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lillian and Vincent sat together on the porch swing he'd built when she was expecting Emma. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "I was thinking about tomorrow," Vincent said, his arm around her shoulders. 15 years since I found a stubborn widow who didn't want my charity." Lillian leaned against him, comfortable in the familiar contours of his body. 15 years since a cowboy with more kindness than sense offered his table to a desperate stranger. Vincent chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Best decision I ever made. Better than buying this ranch," she teased. "The ranch would be worthless without you to share it," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You know that." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently as Vincent pushed it with one foot. The sounds of night surrounded them, crickets chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pasture, the soft whisper of wind through the pines. "I have something for you," Vincent said finally, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until tomorrow, but I'm not sure I can." He pressed a small package into her hand, a familiar size and shape that immediately brought tears to Lillian's eyes. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal another wooden box, this one even more beautifully crafted than the one he'd given her that first Christmas. Inside was a locket similar to her original silver one, but this was gold with tiny sapphires set around the edge. "Open it," Vincent urged softly. Inside were 2 miniature portraits, one of them on their wedding day, the other a family portrait taken just last month with all 4 children. On the opposite side was engraved, "From scraps to abundance, our journey of love." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks as she looked up at him. "It's beautiful, Vince. Perfect." He wiped her tears away with gentle fingers, just as he had that first Christmas Eve. "I wanted something to mark how far we've come. From that first night when you had nothing but your dignity and courage, to now surrounded by the family and home we've built together." Lillian closed her hand around the locket, her heart overflowing with gratitude for this man and the life they'd created. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," she admitted. "That night behind the saloon, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning." Vincent pulled her closer. "Do you remember what Jenkins said at our wedding? That some people spend their whole lives searching for gold in the ground when the real treasure is in the people they meet along the way." Lillian smiled at the memory. Old Jenkins had passed on 3 winters ago, leaving his ranch to his nephew, but his best horses to Benjamin, a legacy the boy cherished. He was right. All the gold in California couldn't equal what we found in each other. Vincent took the locket from her hand and fastened it around her neck, letting it rest beside the original silver one she still wore every day. "2 lockets for 2 chapters of our story," he said. "The beginning and the middle. We'll need a 3rd one someday for whatever comes next." "More grandchildren than we can count," Lillian predicted with a smile. "Gray hair for both of us, watching our children build their own lives while we rock on this porch and remember." "Sounds perfect to me," Vincent agreed, pulling her close for a kiss that held all the tenderness of their first and all the depth of knowledge that comes only with years of loving one person through every joy and sorrow. The following day, the entire family made the trip into Coloma. The town had changed over the years, growing more established as the gold rush fever subsided, and more permanent businesses and homes replaced the hasty structures of boom times. The Silver Dollar Saloon still stood, though it had been renovated and expanded. As they passed it, Vincent squeezed Lillian's hand, both of them remembering the desperate woman who had once begged for scraps in its back alley, and the lonely cowboy who had found his future by offering a meal and kindness. They spent the day purchasing supplies, choosing fabric for Emma's dress, and visiting with townspeople who had known them for years. The Xavier family was well respected now, Vincent for his fair business practices, and Lillian for her generous contributions to the church and school. No one looking at the elegant woman in her well-made dress, surrounded by her handsome husband and 4 healthy children, would have recognized the widow who once hid in shadows, too ashamed to be seen in her desperate state. Yet Lillian never forgot that woman, carrying her memory not as a burden but as a reminder of how quickly fortune could change for good or ill. In the late afternoon, as they prepared to head home, Vincent surprised the family by announcing they would be dining at the hotel restaurant, an unusual treat that set the children buzzing with excitement. As they entered the restaurant, Lillian gasped. In the corner was a table set apart from the others, decorated with flowers and candles. A small card on the table read, "Reserved for the Xavier family." "You arranged this," she said, turning to Vincent with shining eyes. He smiled, looking pleased with himself. "It seemed appropriate to mark 15 years with a proper meal at a proper table, though this time you're sitting beside me, not across from me." The children, sensing something special but not understanding its significance, were on their best behavior as they took their seats. The meal was everything a celebratory dinner should be: excellent food, lively conversation, and the warm glow of family togetherness. Halfway through the meal, the hotel owner approached their table. "Mr. Xavier, Mrs. Xavier," he greeted them with a respectful nod. "I hope everything is to your satisfaction." "Excellent as always, Mr. Phillips," Vincent assured him. "Good, good." The man seemed nervous. "I have something for you, Mrs. Xavier. A gentleman left it for you earlier today with instructions that it be delivered during your dinner." He handed Lillian a small envelope before retreating with a bow. Puzzled, she looked at Vincent, who appeared equally confused. "Did you arrange something else?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not that I know of." Intrigued, Lillian opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note written in an unfamiliar hand. Some debts can never be repaid, but acknowledging them is a start. With gratitude for your example of dignity in hardship, a fellow traveler." Beneath the note was a bank draft for a substantial amount, enough to pay for a year's education for all 4 children at the finest school in Sacramento. "What is it, Mama?" Benjamin asked, noting her stunned expression. Lillian handed the note to Vincent, who read it with raised eyebrows. "An anonymous gift," she explained to the children. "Someone being very generous to our family." "But why?" Emma wanted to know. Lillian exchanged a look with Vincent before answering carefully. "Sometimes people do kind things because they want to honor something they admire. Like when your father offered his table to a hungry stranger long ago." The children accepted this explanation readily enough, more interested in the promised dessert than in mysterious benefactors. But Lillian's mind raced, wondering who might have known her story and felt moved to such generosity. That night, after returning home and settling the children, Lillian and Vincent discussed the mysterious gift on their porch. "It could be anyone who knew about your circumstances back then," Vincent mused. "Someone who perhaps faced similar hardships and came through them." Lillian fingered the bank draft thoughtfully. "Whoever it was, they've given our children a wonderful opportunity." "What will you do with it?" Vincent asked. Their ranch was prosperous enough that they didn't need the money for necessities, but advanced education was always costly. "Exactly what the giver intended, I think," Lillian decided. "Benjamin and Emma are reaching ages where they could benefit from more formal schooling than I can provide at home. This would allow them to attend that boarding school in Sacramento we've discussed." Vincent nodded. "And establish a fund for Matthew and Rebecca when their time comes, with enough left to perhaps help other children whose families can't afford such opportunities," Lillian added, an idea taking shape in her mind. Vincent smiled, recognizing the familiar determination in his wife's expression. "You're thinking of establishing some kind of scholarship, aren't you? Perhaps a way to extend the chain of kindness that began that night behind the saloon." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence as she always had. "One act of generosity changed the course of my life, our lives. Imagine what might happen if we could do the same for others." In the years that followed, the Xavier family did establish such a scholarship, providing educational opportunities for children of families fallen on hard times. They never discovered the identity of their anonymous benefactor, but the gift sparked a legacy of giving that extended far beyond what either Lillian or Vincent could have imagined on that fateful night when a hungry widow first accepted a seat at a kind cowboy's table. As their children grew and the ranch prospered, Vincent and Lillian remained each other's anchors, partners in every sense of the word. Their love story, begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, became something of a local legend, passed down to inspire future generations with its message of hope, second chances, and the transformative power of simple kindness. And on every anniversary of their meeting, no matter where life had taken them, they made sure to share a meal at a table set for 2, a reminder of how the simple act of breaking bread together had changed everything. When Rebecca, their youngest, married at 20, Lillian stood in the garden of the home she and Vincent had built, watching her daughter dance with her new husband. At 57, Lillian's hair had silvered, and the years had softened the once sharp lines of hunger and fear on her face, replacing them with the gentle creases of laughter and wisdom. Vincent, now 60, stood beside her, his hand warm and familiar in hers. He'd slowed somewhat in recent years, the decades of ranch work taking their toll on his body, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had first offered hope to a desperate widow. "Our last chick has left the nest," he said softly, watching Rebecca's radiant face as she whirled in her husband's arms. Not left, Lillian corrected. Just expanded the circle. She nodded toward Benjamin and his wife, who stood nearby with their 3 children. Emma was deep in conversation with her husband, a professor at the university in San Francisco, while Matthew introduced his fiancée to distant relatives. The Xavier family had indeed expanded, spreading out but remaining connected to the ranch and to each other. Benjamin had taken over much of the day-to-day management, allowing Vincent to focus on the horse breeding program he'd developed into one of the finest in the state. Emma had become a teacher, inspired by the scholarship program her parents had established. Matthew combined ranching with a talent for veterinary medicine, while Rebecca showed promise as an artist, capturing the beauty of the land in paintings that were beginning to attract attention beyond Coloma. We did well, didn't we? Vincent murmured, his eyes moving from one child to another, pride evident in his expression. Very well, Lillian agreed, squeezing his hand. Though I can scarcely believe we've come so far from that night behind the saloon. Later, after the celebration had wound down and their guests departed, Lillian and Vincent walked together through the gardens they'd planted decades earlier. The trees were mature now, heavy with fruit, the pathways worn smooth by years of family footsteps. "I've been thinking," Vincent said as they paused by the rose arbor where Rebecca had exchanged her vows that morning. "Maybe it's time for us to take that trip we've always talked about." Lillian looked up at him, surprised. "To Boston. After all these years," he nodded. "Benjamin has the ranch well in hand. We're not getting any younger, and I'd like to see where you grew up, meet whatever family you still have there." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. She'd spoken often of her childhood home, but the distance and demands of ranching had always made a return visit seem impractical. That Vincent would suggest it now, when they could finally afford both the time and expense, touched her deeply. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "Though I'm not sure what we'll find after all this time." "Whatever we find, we'll face it together," Vincent replied, the promise in his voice as strong as it had been on their wedding day. "Just as we've faced everything else." The journey east was an adventure, unlike any they'd undertaken before. They traveled by train, a luxury that left Vincent marveling at the changing landscape and Lillian reminiscing about her journey west with Thomas so many years ago, a trip made with such hope and ended in such despair. Boston had changed dramatically in the 35 years since Lillian had left. Yet some streets and buildings remained familiar enough to evoke powerful memories. She showed Vincent the church where she'd been baptized, the school she'd attended, and finally, the modest house where she'd grown up, now occupied by strangers. They located distant cousins who welcomed them warmly, amazed to find the young woman they'd assumed long dead not only alive but prosperous and happy. Lillian shared the story of her journey from hopeful bride to destitute widow to beloved wife and mother, omitting none of the hardship, but emphasizing the unexpected joy she'd found through it all. "It was Vincent who saved me," she told her relatives one evening, her hand resting comfortably in his as it had for decades. "You saved yourself," Vincent corrected gently. "I just offered a table and a name. You did the hard work of rebuilding a life from nothing." The cousins watched this exchange with smiling eyes, recognizing the deep partnership that can only develop between two people who have walked a long road together through every kind of weather. When they returned to California after a month away, the ranch welcomed them home with familiar comfort. Though they'd enjoyed their travels, both felt a profound gratitude to return to the land they'd nurtured and the home they'd built together. That evening, sitting on their porch swing just as they had countless nights before, Lillian rested her head against Vincent's shoulder. "Thank you for taking me home," she said softly. "Which home?" he asked. "Boston or here?" "Both," she replied, "but mostly for bringing me home to myself, for seeing value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Vincent pressed a kiss to her silver hair. "That was easy. You've always been the strongest person I've ever known, Lillian. Even that first night, starving and desperate, you had more dignity than most people with full bellies and fine clothes." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them, the familiar sounds of their ranch settling for the night, distant cattle lowing, chickens clucking as they roosted, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "You ever wonder about that person?" Lillian asked eventually. "The one who sent the anonymous gift on our 15th anniversary? I think about it sometimes, who they might have been, why our story mattered to them." Vincent considered this. "I used to wonder. Now I think it doesn't really matter who they were, only that they understood the importance of passing kindness forward, just as we've tried to do with the scholarship fund." Lillian nodded against his shoulder. "The chain continues, from you to me, from us to others. And now from our children to the world," Vincent added. "Benjamin with his fair employment practices at the ranch, Emma educating the next generation, Matthew healing animals, Rebecca capturing beauty in her art. They're all extending what we started, each in their own way." As night fell completely, painting the sky with stars just as it had on that long-ago evening when their story began, Lillian marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of despair behind a saloon to this moment of profound contentment, surrounded by the fruits of decades of love and labor. "I never imagined this life," she whispered. "Not even in my wildest dreams." Vincent's arm tightened around her. "Nor did I. But I wouldn't change a moment of it, not one step of the path that led us here." In the years that followed, they watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren, and celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by the family and community they'd nurtured together. The Xavier Ranch became known not only for its fine horses and cattle, but as a place where those in need could always find work, a meal, and the dignity of being treated with respect. When Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Lillian mourned deeply, but found strength in the legacy they'd built together. She lived another 7 years, remaining active in the Scholarship Foundation and delighting in the youngest generation of Xaviers who climbed onto her lap for stories of the olden days. On her 85th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family in the garden she and Vincent had planted, Lillian fingered the 2 lockets she still wore every day, the silver one from their first Christmas and the gold one from their 15th anniversary. "Great-grandmother," asked one of the youngest children, "why do you always wear those lockets?" Lillian smiled, opening them to show the child the treasures inside, faded images and words that held the essence of her life's greatest story. "Because they remind me of the most important thing I ever learned," she replied. "That sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our darkest moments, and that a simple act of kindness like offering a table to a hungry stranger can change everything." When Lillian joined Vincent in eternal rest the following spring, they were buried together beneath the rose arbor where so many family celebrations had taken place. The simple headstone bore their names, dates, and a single phrase that encapsulated their extraordinary journey. From a table shared to a life built, their love transformed scraps into abundance. The Xavier Ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of their descendants. The story of the widow and the cowboy passing from generation to generation, a reminder that even in the hardest times, dignity, kindness, and the courage to offer or accept help can write a love story more powerful than any hardship. And in Coloma, long after the gold rush was just a chapter in history books, people still sometimes spoke of Lillian and Vincent Xavier, the unlikely couple whose remarkable journey from desperate poverty to profound abundance proved that the greatest treasures aren't found in mines or streams, but in the human capacity for compassion, resilience, and love.